Imagine a time when farmers took up arms against their own government, not for independence but for basic fairness. This isn't a tale from some distant land. It happened right here in America, and it helped set the stage for a revolution that would change the world. In the rolling hills of North Carolina between 1765 and 1771, a storm was brewing. The regulator movement, a rebellion that would shake the very foundations of colonial rule, was about to begin. But what drove these ordinary farmers to risk everything in a fight against their own officials? Let's set the scene. It's the mid-1700s and North Carolina is a British colony. The coastal regions are thriving, but inland, it's a different story. Here, in the Piedmont area, farmers are struggling. They're not just battling the elements and poor soil. They're up against a far more insidious enemy, corruption. You see, the colonial government was centered in the east, far from these inland communities. Local officials, left to their own devices, saw an opportunity. They began lining their pockets at the expense of the hardworking farmers. Sheriffs inflated taxes. Lawyers charged exorbitant fees. Judges? Well, let's just say justice wasn't exactly blind. For the farmers, it was a perfect storm of injustice. They were paying taxes but seeing no benefits. Roads remained in disrepair. There were no schools for their children, and if they couldn't pay their inflated taxes, they'd lose their farms. It was a system rigged against them, and they knew it. Enter the regulators. These weren't revolutionaries seeking to overthrow the government. No, they were ordinary men and women who'd simply had enough. They wanted to regulate their own affairs, to have a say in the laws that governed them. Their motto, fair play and equal rights. The movement began peacefully. In 1764, a group of farmers led by men like Herman Husband and James Hunter petitioned the governor. They asked for fairer taxation, an end to illegal fees, and more representation. Their requests fell on deaf ears. As frustrations grew, so did the movement. By 1768, thousands of farmers were calling themselves regulators. They refused to pay taxes or attend court. Some even formed vigilante groups, forcibly shutting down corrupt courts. The colonial government's response? Ignore the problem and hope it goes away. Spoiler alert, it didn't. In September 1768, things came to a head in Hillsborough. During a court session, a group of regulators burst in. They dragged corrupt officials into the street, beat them, and mockingly held their own court. It was a shocking display of defiance that couldn't be ignored. Governor William Tryon, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, tried to negotiate. He promised reforms and even toured the Piedmont region, but his words rang hollow. The corruption continued and the regulators' anger simmered. In 1770, the government decided to crack down. They passed the Johnston Riot Act, essentially making it illegal to be a regulator. The message was clear: fall in line or face the consequences. The regulators, however, weren't about to back down. In May 1771, they decided to make one last stand. Around 2,000 regulators gathered near Alamance Creek, armed and ready to fight. Governor Tryon, leading a militia of 1,000 men, met them head-on. What followed was the Battle of Alamance, the largest armed conflict in colonial America before the Revolutionary War. For 2 hours, the poorly organized regulators fought against Tryon's well-trained militia. In the end, the regulators were defeated. 9 of their men lay dead, with dozens more wounded. In the aftermath, Tryon's retribution was swift and brutal. He hanged 7 regulator leaders, including James Few. Herman Husband, one of the movement's key figures, fled to Pennsylvania. The regulator movement, it seemed, had been crushed, but had it really? While the rebellion was over, its spirit lived on. Many regulators, disillusioned with British rule, became eager supporters of the American Revolution just a few years later. The issues they fought for, fair representation, just taxation, and government accountability, became central themes in the fight for independence. The regulator movement, often overlooked in our history books, was a crucial chapter in America's story. It showed the power of ordinary people standing up against injustice. It highlighted the growing tensions between the colonies and Britain, and it foreshadowed the revolutionary spirit that would soon sweep across America. As James Few, one of the hanged regulator leaders, reportedly said before his execution, "Our blood will be as good seed in good ground that will soon produce 100-fold." Indeed, the seeds planted by the regulators would bear fruit in ways they could never have imagined. Their fight for fair governance and representation would echo in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Their courage would inspire future generations of Americans to stand up for their rights. So, the next time you hear about the American Revolution, remember the regulators. Remember the farmers of North Carolina who dared to challenge corruption and demand justice. They may not have won their battle, but they helped pave the way for a much larger victory. The regulator movement reminds us that the roots of American democracy run deep. It shows us that the fight for fairness and representation has always been at the heart of our nation's story. And perhaps most importantly, it teaches us that ordinary people, when united for a cause, can shape the course of history. As we face our own challenges today, we might do well to remember the spirit of the regulators. Their struggle reminds us that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, and that the power to shape our society has always rested in the hands of the people. The regulator movement may have ended in 1771, but its legacy lives on. It's a testament to the enduring American spirit of justice, fairness, and the courage to stand up for what's right. And that, perhaps, is the most valuable lesson this often forgotten chapter of history has to teach us.